Hello, Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to this super fun VR. This is a video response to Mags Black, who started the tarot tag Tarot 90s Feels. Okay, so I'm going to start off by just admitting right out the bat that I can be a very literal person, and I could not help when I saw the tag pop up in my feed and I started watching videos. I was like, okay, I get the gist. Really, the gist is about the tarot decks that give you that 90s feeling, right? But for me, the 90s were a time when I graduated high school, I went to college, I was in this place of like really finding myself. And the circles I was running in this was when I was really finding my spirituality. I was exploring witchcraft and tarot and all of the things. And so what I really want to talk about in my VR is the decks that I experienced in the 90s, some of which I actually bought in the 90s. So I'm going to be sharing those with you today, and I cannot wait to dig into it. So I'm going to start with the decks that I actually owned in the 90s and just talk about those first, and then I'm going to talk about some decks that I've acquired more recently, but that I encountered, experienced, or was super familiar with in the 90s. I do have one slight cheat because one of my decks technically was published in the year 2000, but I like that whole time period. I feel like it's not, as Mags pointed out, the 90s kind of trickled through a time period, right? It wasn't just like 2000, January 1st, and it's kind of over. Like there was those vibes throughout. So I kind of, I guess, have that in there. And with all of this babbling aside, let me get into it. I have to start with my very first ever tarot deck, the Osho Zen Tarot. Now, this is not a deck that is, I would say, popular today, but it's still in print, and this is my original copy that I bought shortly after I graduated high school. And this was because I was hanging out with a group of people, my friends, my people that would eventually become coven mates, and we would do these divination gatherings, and we would just hang out, we'd visit with each other, and there would be tarot readings exchanged. And I really wasn't gelling with the really common popular decks of the time, which would be obviously the Rider-Waite-Smith or the Thoth Tarot. Those weren't decks that really spoke to me, and I wanted to learn the tarot, but I wanted to find a deck that I would be excited to work with, and this is definitely the one that jumped out at me. Now, this copy is trimmed. It does usually have the black borders that go all the way around, but I know this deck backwards and forwards. Like the relationship that other people have with a Pamela Coleman Smith deck, like the original Rider-Waite-Smith, like the yellow box, that's the relationship I have with this deck. And so it's home, and it's familiar, and it's comfortable. I very, very rarely reach for it these days, but this would be a deck that I would never part with because, again, I know it so well, and I feel like it kind of knows me in a way. But the Osho Zen was actually published in 1994, so a year before I graduated high school. I mean, the 90s were such a formative time for me. I was figuring out that I was witchy. I was figuring out my sexuality. I was dealing with all of that all at the same time. And so having some touchstones for personal growth and I guess tarot really gave me a place and a place to go to and a way to get to know myself. And that was so incredibly valuable, particularly at that time when everything was very confusing and everything I felt like that mattered to me was outside of the societal norm at the time. I mean, embracing both my sexuality and paganism was a bold move considering that one part of my family, and really all parts of my family to degrees, but one part of my family was so intensely religious. It was scary, and it was also freeing, and it was just a huge part of my life experience. And so this deck kind of held my hand through those years where I was getting to know myself and really figuring out what life was going to look like for me. And it was confusing and, again, kind of chaotic. And also, I feel like I was doing a lot of processing and healing, and I feel like this deck just did a wonderful job. This deck, again, still in print, but when I got it, it actually came out in this, like, 90s style plastic VHS tape. Like, do you remember when the Disney movies and stuff came in those boxes? Yeah, that's the packaging that this deck came in for years and years. It's only, I don't know when it changed, but now it comes in a cardboard box. But yeah, this deck, it will always be home for me. And there's things that, people get kind of worked up about this deck, and I get it. There's some problematic things with Osho himself that came about, and I completely understand how that affects people, but my relationship with this deck is intensely personal and never had anything to do with Osho himself for me. It had to do with the artist, who is Mahadeva Padma, her visuals, and the keywords, and the parables. And the parts where it was like kind of like Osho's teachings that were in the book actually never resonated with me from day one. In fact, the MasterCard that comes with this deck, I threw it away shortly after purchasing the deck the first time. And I've never had any interest in working with a card where some spiritual leader decides to put himself in, or has himself, or is put in as some kind of a guru in the deck. That just never really resonated for me. But I always took these at face value, and I found them to be really, really helpful. So the Osho Zen Tarot is definitely all the 90s feelings for me. And that leads me to one of the very next decks I bought. And it was my very first Oracle deck that really, really resonated with me, and it is the DOW Oracle. This is by the same artist that did the Osho Zen Tarot, Ma Deva Padma, and it is an incredible deck. In fact, I'm going to be filming a real deep dive into this deck, so watch for that. That's coming out on the channel here really soon, sometime later this month. But in any case, this is an incredible, it's all in order because I'm getting ready for my walkthrough, but this is an incredible Oracle deck, and it was the first one that I felt like I could read and understand, and that I got. And a lot of that is because it's balanced, so there's light and dark in this deck because it's based on the I Ching, which is already a balanced divination system. So there's positive cards, there's difficult cards, and because it's balanced, it felt cohesive to work with from the beginning. And more than that, the artwork is beautiful. And this grouping of keywords really gave me so much to work with as somebody who had really had a hard time with the Oracle decks of the time. Because, of course, in the 90s, the Oracle decks that were really common and popular were not real cute. And they had this very, like, angel-y, new agey sort of vibe to them that just never really quite landed for me personally. And this sort of fluffy a take on things. I don't know. So this one just really, really just ticked a lot of boxes. And it's actually this deck that sort of informed how it kind of set the bar for Oracle decks for me in the future, because having all of this information, having it be so balanced, having so many cards, there's 64, in the first Oracle deck that I truly bonded with, that completely transformed what I would expect later on from Oracle decks in my library of decks that I have available to me. I really feel like having something this good so early in my journey really, really shaped my practice in so many informative ways, or meaningful ways, maybe is a better way to put that. But yeah, there's a lot to this. So keep an eye out for the video where I'll be talking about this deck in a lot more depth, but this is legit straight up 90s vibes for me. There's no escaping it. The next set of decks that I have to share is not going to be a big surprise if you've been watching my channel for a bit, and it is my soul cards. Now, I got these around the same time. So what I was struggling with when I was new to tarot and oracle and divination in general was I was really battling a very logical part of my brain that was having a really hard time looking at divination as something that was possible. I really felt at that time like I needed an explanation for everything. And with the Osho Zen, my way to started to realize early on that I wanted to really get in touch with that part of me that was unexplainable that could read the cards, because I'd already had some experiences with the Osho Zen and the DOW Oracle where I felt like I was figuring things out, or I was learning things about people that would sit in front of me for readings, my friends or family or whatever, that I would have no other way to know. And I was battling with how that all worked and really wanted to sort of take it to the next level. And I really challenged myself. I mean, I did that in the beginning with Osho Zen. You may have heard the story before. But when I first was working with Osho Zen, I read through the guidebook once and then I threw the guidebook in the trash. Okay? I mean, I was a teenager. Let's just, roll with that. But because I didn't want to rely on it, I wanted to learn how to trust that part of me that had access to something I didn't understand. And so I did that. And that really helped to sort of boost my intuitive practice early on. And I'm still so grateful that I did that, as bold as it was. And later I regretted not having the guidebook and I've gotten it back. But that taught me to lean into the stuff that I couldn't quite understand. So for me, this was the next step. When I first saw these in a shop, I was drawn right to them because this is the soul cards, 1 and 2 combined. When I first saw them in a shop, I was drawn to them because there was no meanings on the cards. And they were just artwork, and they were designed to be read intuitively. They were designed to be worked with by feeling your way through them. And that was so intriguing to me. So I started out with Soul Cards 1, and very, very shortly after, I mean, it must have been weeks later, I added Soul Cards 2 and combined them. And I've never looked back since. And this just exploded my intuitive understanding. And by the way, because I forgot to say, the DOW Oracle was published in 1998. The soul cards were actually published in 1996. So I might have my order of when I got them backwards, because I feel like I got both of these when they were relatively new, because I was hanging out at metaphysical stores back then. I would attend a book club at a local metaphysical store, and a lot of my friends would go and hang out in the metaphysical store. So in any case, the soul cards taught me how to trust my inner voice, and it was just an excellent exercise in not worrying so much about how tarot and oracle and divination really worked, but just trusting that it worked. And I figured all that out with the soul cards and with my Osho Zen as I got more comfy with it. And yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm pretty sure this came right after the Osho Zen, and then the DOW Oracle came later, because I feel like I had some fits and starts with other oracle decks first. Like I tried this one unicorn deck. It may have been Doreen Virtue. It had gold gilding and it had this really pretty soft artwork of a unicorn on the back. So I'm trying to remember the name of it, but I think it was just called the Unicorn Oracle or something. But I remember I tried that one and I was like, oh, I guess oracle decks aren't for me. And then it was later that I found the DOW Oracle, I'm pretty sure. But this, I think, came really early on, because it would have been around the same time that I'd pitched the guidebook for the Osho Zen, and I was really testing myself. And I was also testing, really truly, I think what I was doing was testing tarot to see if I could trust it, like testing divination, testing my intuition, testing my inner voice. Like, would it actually take me to truth, or was I just making it all up? And I think when you're new to intuitive reading, and I'm going to be talking about intuitive reading a lot, probably this month, but when you're new to intuitive tarot reading or oracle reading or whatever, it often feels like you're faking it, right? And so I really had to just learn to practice and trust and feel awkward and feel maybe even, I don't know, embarrassed, or let myself just not worry about what anybody thought, even myself, and just go with the experience of it. And so I really started to do that. And man, the places I've gone with this deck, I could never imagine going with any other deck. I'm sure it's possible now that I have such a relationship that I do, but the kind of readings I was able to give, the things I've talked to ghosts with this deck. I feel like if I'm not sure, if I need to do some really intense stuff and I need cards as a tool, this is one of the first things I would think of if it's really deep, intense stuff. And for a long time, I started to like not bring these out for people because I'd gotten some really strong reactions, and I was worried that they would scare people because I got really intense readings out of them. And then I learned how to disclaimer, and I learned how to frame things, and I got better at managing those intensities when they arose. Anyway, the soul cards is a huge part of my 90s tarot and oracle history, and are a huge, huge, huge part of my practice today. And again, one of those decks that I don't think I would ever... I know that I would never ever part with this specific deck. This is probably one of those things that if there was ever going to be like, I don't know, a fire or something, I feel like I'd probably want to save this just because we have so much history together. And actually, it's worth pointing out that something else I have on the table that I also got in the 90s is this crystal. I got this really early on, and it actually used to live with my soul cards in a bag together. So this was like a bonded pair. They've since separated. I can work with this crystal with other decks and with other things, and I use it constantly. It's still my go-to. But that was my first crystal. It was technically my second. My first was like a manufactured crystal, an opalite, I think it was, or it was glass. I don't know. It looked like opalite, but I don't know if opalite itself is manufactured. I can't remember. But it was shaped like an egg, and it literally called to me from a shop, and thus began my love of crystals. But that's a story for another day. In any case, the soul cards were huge, huge, huge part of my formative years in tarot and oracle, which happened in the 90s. Thus, this tag and me being so excited about it. So, another deck that I acquired in the 90s, Brian Froud's Fairies Oracle. We've had a rocky relationship, this Fairies Oracle and I, but we finally have come to understand one another. So, this deck always felt like it was... I don't know if mocking me is the right word, but it always felt a little bit like it was speaking over my head. But this deck, the Fairies Oracle, was published in the year 2000. So this is the one that kind of crosses over. This one I ended up picking up much later. Basically, I was going to these divination events with my friends, and we were real into fae and dragon work at the time. We were doing a lot of Celtic shamanistic sort of stuff. And this just was really high up on everybody's list. I feel like many people in my group had it, and I just decided to give it a try, and it still today is the deck that feels the most genuinely fae of any deck I've ever worked with. The Tarot of the She has a lot of this wild feeling too, but it's still nothing like Brian Froud. And I mean, his artwork really defined, I think, the 90s for me in a lot of ways. His, The Crushed Fairy book was really popular at the time. He felt like somebody who observed and recorded the fae that he experienced more than somebody that was just like, oh, hey, let's make a cool fairy deck. You know what I mean? Like, it just felt so genuine. And the guidebook reads that way too. But for a long time, I felt like I just couldn't work with this deck, but I could never bring myself to part with this original copy that I got. And I thought that was so interesting. I did later on have the Heart of Fairies Oracle, which felt much gentler and somehow softer. And I ended up doing quite a bit more work. Look, I've got some blemishes here. I should have done my disheveled decks tag. Oh well. I guess this is also kind of that because you can see my most beat up decks in this video. But anyways, because these are the decks I've had, you know, for decades. But anyway, I did get Heart of Fairy and it was so much softer and I was like, oh, this is my deck. But I still couldn't get rid of this one. Even though this was still available, I could have easily replaced it. I never was able to part with it. And then later on, I discovered that the Heart of Fairy didn't quite feel like the right thing either. And I ended up coming home to this one and bonding with it much more. I prefer to work with it with the guidebook. Someday I might do what Danny has done and add keywords to the cards. I think I would really, really, really enjoy doing that. But I need to give that some thought and figure out how I might go about that and what that might look like before I do it, especially to this original copy, which I did end up edging when I started modifying decks in a really pretty sort of sandstone color that matches the earthy backs of the deck. But anyway, that is the Fairies Oracle that I also owned, I guess technically in the early 2000s, but in that time period of life when I was still like, when I only had like, you know, 10-ish decks. I mean, I had a lot from the beginning, even among my friends. I feel like I liked working with different tools even way back then. The last deck that I actually owned in the 90s, but had decluttered years and years ago and only literally recently, very recently, repurchased is this Unicorn Tarot by Suzanne Starr and Liz Hilton. And I need to eat my words because I completely roasted this deck. I can't remember where, probably in a comment to somebody else's video not that long ago. There's things about this deck that like I really thought were just bad. Okay. But I've been having a really incredible experience with this deck lately and I've really come to understand it in a new way now. But this deck was published in 1995, the year that I graduated high school. And I'm pretty sure this was the first tarot I bought after the Osho Zen. So I bought the Soul cards, the DOW Oracle, and then Fairies, if I was to think of a timeline. I'm guessing that I got this sometime before I got the DOW Oracle. Definitely before I got Fairies. I think after I got Soul cards. But it ended up being a thing that I sort of grabbed. And at the time, I really didn't think that... How do I say this? I guess I really, at the time, I was very resistant to anything that felt too close to the artwork of the Rider-Waite-Smith. I think I'm going to zoom this in a little bit. And this deck felt very, like, I don't know, boring and basic in some way to me. I think because I was so used to the vivid colors and scenes and stories of the Osho Zen that I just was like, yeah, but it's pretty because it's got unicorns on it, so I guess I like it kind of thing. And I just kept it in this box. I still have the box, but it now holds magical writing tools. But I had this box and all my decks fit in this box. It was like a kind of a biggish, gorgeous, engraved box. Anyways, this just lived in the box and I never ever used it. And so in the early, I want to say like around 2017 or 2018, I guess it wasn't that recent. Gosh, when would it have been? So I guess it would be about 2010 or so, I did a bit of a purge of my rather limited at the time tarot library collection. I trimmed it all down to just a couple decks because at the time I was on a bit of a break from tarot. I wasn't really using a lot and it just felt like clutter. And this was one of the decks that I had decluttered at the time. I think I just dropped it off at a charity shop or something. Because I just had never really bonded with it. It just seemed, at the time, I remember it felt like there was just a unicorn slapped into every card and that there was no meaning or thought behind it. But something happened to me in July when I was sort of reacquainting myself with my spirit, one of my spirit guide type things. One of my guides is a unicorn. And I was reacquainting myself. I don't know why, I just want to keep flipping images while I'm talking. But I was reacquainting myself with that guide who I had neglected lately. And something drew me to like look this deck up or something, or maybe I was looking for another unicorn tarot. I don't know. I was just really feeling it. And I looked up and I found a walkthrough and started looking through the cards and I was like, oh my God, I understand. It felt like in every single card, it's not that the unicorn is just slapped on there. The unicorn is there as an assist or a guide to the character on the card. And the moment I started looking at it through that lens, the unicorns took on this incredible dimension. And now this deck feels completely potent with tons of meaning. And I can never go back to looking at it the way that I did way back when. And it helps that years later now in my tarot work, my tarot life, I guess, I have since become super familiar and comfortable with the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery. I understand it. I'm fine with it. It still doesn't excite me, but this does, because it's that similar style of imagery, but now with this extra layer of the unicorn spirit or guide to help our characters on the card, or, you know, be there for them in some way. And I just, oh my gosh, it just totally opened up. But this deck was a classic 90s deck for me, and was one that just defined, again, was a big part of that time of my life. Plus, hello, the backings, amazing. Love it. Okay, and this is so funny. This guidebook was written by Suzanne Starr, who was some kind of like fairly well-known psychic at the time, which is hilarious. But yeah, copyright 1995. The artist of the deck is Liz Hilton. And this doesn't have a bag right now because it's been living in a wrap with another deck. So anyway, the Unicorn Tarot. The next three decks are decks that I had experiences with in some way or another that were published in the 90s and that are formative for me in some way. The one that's the least formative, I'll show that one next. This is one that I recently acquired, the Universal Weight in a Tin. Now, the tinned version wasn't available in the 90s, but the full-size version was. And this, to me, is just sort of reminiscent of when I was first encountering, like, it felt like everybody who did tarot at the time, outside of my little small circle of friends, had one of these types of decks. A Universal Weight, or an Albano Weight, or a yellow box Rider-Waite deck, but everybody felt like it had that. The plaid back one. I mean, like, it just felt like everybody around me had this deck. And so the images became iconic in their way. And recently I did a video and I was talking about how I was decluttering something. I forget maybe it was in a this or that. In a this or that. I'll try to remember to link it up in the cards. In a this or that, I was sort of trimming down my Rider-Waite Smith-ish decks. And I realized I had the Centennial in a tin, and then I also had the Centennial full size. And I had picked up in a trade the De Brigg Original Tarot, which is a really sharp, brightly colored Rider-Waite Smith on linen cardstock. It's quite lovely. And I remember asking in the video if anybody knew of any kind of similarly clean lines, bright colors, Rider-Waite Smith, and so that I could have a tinned one that wasn't the Centennial, that was a little bit more, I don't know, exciting to me in some way. And several people recommended this. So of course I went and scooped it up. It was like under 20 bucks, and I do really like it. So for a Rider-Waite Smith, it's delightful. Rider-Waite Smith will still continue to be, I think, more of a study deck than a working deck for me, but this is a great one. And I did see this one everywhere in the 90s. The next two are decks that really made an impression on me when I was, you know, in that time period, but that I didn't acquire until much later in my journey. The first of these is the Robin Wood Tarot. Okay, Robin Wood is, I mean, this is iconic 90s. And I do have also, there's a separate guidebook you can get for this deck that's large and full size. I think I might have scooped this up off of a trade table somewhere. I'm trying to think now. It may have been at a Northwest Tarot Symposium trade table. I'm trying to remember how I got this, because I don't think I bought it. I didn't get it new. Maybe I did buy it new. I might have bought it new. I have a really lengthy deep dive of this deck because it is so good as far as a Rider-Waite Smith alternative, in my opinion. If you're looking for something that's going to give you good, solid understanding of the cards, this is wonderful. And it has so much symbology. One of my favorite things being in the court cards, all the little hints at the characters and their correspondences, such as in the Page of Pentacles. In all the pages, there's a little something attached to their belts, and in our Page of Pentacles, it's a little book. But it's a wonderful, wonderful deck. So I will link the walkthrough, the bigger deep dive I did of this deck up in the cards. The Robin Wood Tarot was published in 1993, and it's really unique. And the thing that really excited me about this deck back in the day was that it was much more witchy, pagan-y feeling. And I think that was very, very, very intentional. It had more of that Celtic pagan kind of vibe over the traditional Rider-Waite Smith, which of course is filled with a lot of Christian symbology and Christian, the Christian, I want to say Hermetic tradition. I'm going to probably mess up my words, but anyway, this one was full of that sort of medieval, pagan-y, earth-centered vibe. These felt like the kind of, I don't know, people that I was surrounding myself with at the time, because, and I was also going through in the 90s a huge breakup with organized Christianity, right? I mean, coming out as a witch, coming out as gay at that time in my life was like, it was a big deal. And so I was having some very hard feelings towards Christianity at the time. And this deck felt less mean. I don't know how else to say it. It felt less mean to me at the time. So when I had friends in my circles that would use this deck, it just always felt really comforting and comfortable. I never quite, like I said, felt really great about the Rider-Waite Smith back then. And gosh, I mean, So good. So good. And again, the big guidebook is amazing. Robin Wood is an absolute treasure. And we lost her recently, which is so sad. But this deck, I think, is a legacy that will live on for a long, long time. But it's wonderful. Very, very classic 90s. But I picked it up, I think, I want to say about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and never looked back. I guess I could check and see when that video was, because I'm pretty sure I made that video within, you know, a couple months of picking this up. But it's in one of Peggy's original embroidered bags. It's so pretty. Anyways, and she made this bag for me just for this deck. And finally, the deck that sort of kicked off my whole experience with divination in the first place. And that is the deck that was used to give me my first ever tarot reading, and that is the Voyager Tarot. This is a copy of the now out of print older edition, and the Voyager Tarot was published in 1998. And that doesn't feel right. I wonder if this edition, it's got to be before that. It says 1998, but that can't be right. Oh, second edition, 1998. There we go, 1986. I was like, that doesn't match, because I definitely got this or had my reading with this before I bought any of the other decks, so it had to have already been out. Okay, I feel better about the numbers now, or the dates. This is back in order. Yeah, this is back in order because this was a copy that I got through a trade. I have the mass market copy as well, but a friend sent me this copy, which is the one that I would have been read with at the time. The Voyager Tarot, like I said, it was the very first tarot reading I'd ever gotten. It was a friend of mine. And it was one of my very first ever pagan events with the group that I'd gotten to know. And it was at one of their homes. And my friend Michelle at the time gave me I'm pretty sure it was like a Celtic cross reading with this deck. And it ended up being just this really incredible experience. And that reading resonated with me for years because there was things that she predicted, big life upheaval kind of things that ended up coming to pass exactly as she stated. And it just, I mean, even before then, just the experience of sitting there being read, this deck seemed so magical to me, and I've since gotten to know it a bit and worked with it a bit, and I thought I was just going to get it for nostalgia, the original copy that I had, and then I started working with it, and it really kind of blew me away. It's really quite a great deck, but it is different. It definitely goes its own way, and so happy to have it. But this was the deck, like I said, that really started everything for me in the 90s when I was discovering all of the things. So that is the Voyager Tarot. Oh my goodness. This was such a fun tag to do. And again, I know I didn't quite do it in the spirit of the original tag, which was really about 90s vibes and like which decks sort of made you feel make you feel like the 90s for you, like what they look like for you. And for a lot of people, I think they've been talking about like, oh, the types of music or media or clothing or whatever. The 90s for me was all about discovering my witchy, pagan, tarot-y self. And so the decks that I saw, worked with, experienced in the 90s really were the defining thing of my 90s experience in a lot of ways. Sure, I graduated high school and finally got out of my house and figured out who I was, but this was a huge part of it, and this stuff was holding my hand through the whole thing. So, such a big part of my experience in that period of time. So, really fun to do this. I cannot wait to hear your guys' thoughts and continue watching people's VRs to this. I've seen Mags' original VR and Mags' original video and Dawn Michelle's VR, both of which I'll link in the description box down below for you. But I would love to see other people talking about 90s vibes and 90s decks, whether they are decks that really came out in the 90s because you were doing stuff back in the 90s, or whether there's stuff today that make you think of the 90s. Or if the 90s was way the wrong time period for you, I hope you'll still do a VR and talk about the feels for you of the decks that you were using in a formative time in your life, or the decks that make you think of a formative time in your life. Anyways, I think this is just a fun tag, so I'm excited about it. But anyways, thanks for coming along with me for the ride. As always, extra big thank you to my unicorn fam. Thank you for all of your support. You guys really, really help me to do more of this and really to feel supported in that work, and it makes me so warm and fuzzy when I think about it. So thank you. And to everybody who is watching this video right now, thank you for everything you're doing, for watching this video, for liking, subscribing, commenting, clicking the bell, whatever kind of things you do when you interact here with the channel. It really does make a difference, and it's the best way to help me here is to click that like button or sign up for notifications, come back and watch the videos. So thank you all so much, and may your magic always shine from the inside out. Bye guys.